Hello, and welcome to the infamous Kevin Straw podcast. I'm your host, Kevin, and today I'm going to be speaking with Chris from Conversing with Chris and Mishka, the podcast.
Yeah, Conversing and Chris and Misa, the podcast. My name is Christopher Marquez. I actually host that podcast. I just want to say thank you very much, Kevin, for allowing me to come on here and sharing this platform with you. I really do appreciate it, man. Thank you for that.
Thank you for being my first official guest on this new podcast channel. Yes, I'm very excited to actually have you here. And today we're going to be talking about the revolution in audio from sort of pre-digital to today's sort of digital streaming realities. And I brought on Chris because he's going to give us some of idea, because he actually grew up in an age where tapes and records were sort of on the way out as he was sort of on the way in.
Yes, exactly. So a little context for you guys. I was born in 1991, so that makes I'm turning 29 in July, so I'm nearing the 30s. But when we were talking about this, when me and Kevin, we connected through Messenger, we were bouncing ideas back and forth off of each other. And one of the things that I pitched to him was the idea of like the life and death of the MP3 and the way that consuming music has drastically changed in about 10 years time. And it doesn't seem that long ago, but long are the days of Napster, LimeWire, downloading and creating mix CDs or mixtapes. And now, everything's just basically free. Well, not free, but available to stream at any moment in time. So that's kind of how we got into this topic.
Yeah, so when you say it's free or almost free, it's sort of like we've gone from like mixtapes to basically streaming playlists. And yeah, like I know I have Spotify and I haven't paid for it yet. It occasionally kicks out an ad. I think they're kind of funny, so I enjoy them. But you're like, yeah, it's basically like, here's all this music that you can listen to for 24/7 a day, and you can make a playlist of your favorite music. You can make multiple playlists, but at the end of the day, your output essentially is $0. Whereas I remember being slightly older than you are, having to go to the store and basically drop like $20-$30 on a CD that had maybe 10 songs on it. So definitely
Yeah.
a huge shift in sort of I'll say the price of music to consumers.
Yeah, and I remember, I know, like, back when record stores and CD stores, music stores were actually like commonplace in society. Now they're like they're niche places. You don't really see them anymore.
I see more record stores now, like for vinyl, than I do like music stores.
Yeah, yeah, you'll see like your traditional, just like only for vinyl, but like you don't see like your music store where like you can find like concert DVDs, you can find concert CDs, anything related to music. But I remember back in the day, I think like new CDs used to drop like every Tuesday or something. So it was a point for some people that on Tuesday, I'm going to go, I have $25-$30. I'm going to go try to buy two brand new CDs and see what I get. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
it's
And
nostalgic.
And to add to that, it's also, you have to be like at the store to buy it when it opens or when it's released. And they might be like, yeah, depending on where you live, if you're in a city, it's not too bad, but you could show up and be like, oh yeah, we don't have this. We sold out. You can't have this music now.
Yeah.
Whereas today it's like, all right, everyone can have it. Like they can release, to what is it that U2 and Apple did, where they released their album on every single iPod out there, and they're like, this is the biggest release in the world. And now you got to sit there and say, well, what's a release? Because everyone could theoretically stream it within like a minute of it actually being released.
Yep. Yeah, I remember. Yeah, it was YouTube and Apple. Any Apple device, whether it was a computer, a tablet, a phone, iTouch,
Oh, everyone got it.
anything that had the Apple on it, got that album for free, and it was crazy. And like, I'd never thought about it until you brought it up right now. Like, they really did do that.
Yeah, and the irony to it is, I actually like two of the songs, but then the other songs, I'm like, how did this get on this? Because it started playing one day, and I was just like, what is this?
Yeah, where did this come from?
I'm not the biggest YouTube fan in the world.
Yeah, same. I'm not a diehard YouTube fan. I know who they are, but I'm not constantly seeking their music. But it was just
Yeah, more AC/DC.
And then so like let's take it back a little bit. Let's think
Sure.
about how and this was like I said growing up, 90s child, 90s kid, uh,
Mhm.
getting my hands on a PC at the time. Rest in peace to my grandma, but I destroyed her computer like multiple times using Napster, LimeWire. Like people don't understand how toxic that was to your computer. And then not only that, you were on dial up, holding up the phone line. So if anybody needed to call your house, wasn't happening.
Yeah. Yeah, in our house, it was like my mom versus the internet because she
Yeah,
was the one who had everyone calling her, and she'd be like, "I'm waiting for a call. You need to be off the internet." I'm like, "No, I'm halfway through a download."
yeah, you're like, no, I'm downloading the new Limp Bizkit song. It's taken 30 minutes. I'm halfway there. Like I can't get off the internet right now.
Yeah, well, that was a giant mess as well because, like, I don't know what all the rules were in the United States, but in Canada, they actually put the Canadian copyright law was notably different than the US. Like, you can actually copy music for personal use. Like, if you were to like, and the concept was like when they came up with it was, well, if somebody's recording a song off the internet and they're listening, or not the internet, sorry, if somebody's recording a song off the radio and they're listening to it, it really isn't a copyright infringement since they've heard the song and it's been provided to them, as long as they're not turning around and selling that.
Yeah,
And when the digital age came along, they just were like the laws were just trying to barely keep up. But in Canada, they actually put a levy on music, like, well, not music, but like the music medium. So like tapes, CDs, mini discs that were short lived,
yeah,
and eventually iPod. Like people like in Canada, I don't think people really realize that you're paying like 23 cents per blank cassette, something like 29 cents for a CD. And then when the iPod came out in Canada, they were charging like 25 to $75, depending on how big the iPod was, as sort of money that was taken and sent to the music industry giants that would then split it between all the different musicians, etc., based on how well their music was performing through the normal avenues. And that's sort of one of those things where you're like, yeah, if you bought a CD, like a blank CD on a spindle, and you used it for something else, you're still paying that 29 cent. So when you think about it, if you think about what a spindle of CDs is, it's like 50 to 100 CDs. Well, if you bought 100 CDs in Canada, that's what, $29 on top of the cost of the actual spindle. That's basically going to the music industry. And while eventually that was worked out up here in Canada, I'm not sure the US had the same laws. So where the US, they were like running around, I think they were trying to sue everybody at that point. In Canada, we're like, but we already have this thing where you get paid. You can't get paid
yeah.
twice.
In the US, it's all about litigation, man. So, but you know what's interesting? I never thought about the difference in copyright laws or just between the US and Canada. Like that to me has never crossed my mind until now. And it only makes sense. Like
Uh,
these guys were going to try to figure out how to monetize any sort of music, even if it was just you buying the blank CDs. They're like, we'll still tax this because we know what this is going to be used for eventually. You know what I mean? So that's interesting. Good topic on
yeah, and one of the things to note is like when you think about Canada and US, like I know if I wanted to, I could make a movie right now about James Bond in Canada.
in Canada, right?
Yeah, yeah, I couldn't do it in the United States, and I can't do it in the UK. So my market is very shallow right now, but I could make a James Bond movie here in Canada based on the original Ian Fleming book, and that would be completely legal because it's now considered public domain here in Canada. But in the US, I think it's still there for at least another 10, if not 20 years.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And yeah, like of course, like here, like I said, we the US is everybody's trying to make money off of each other. So I remember like if you were on those websites like LimeWire, Napster, and you were actually like the way that it would work, and I remember is like you would have to download the file and then you would have to have the file there for other people to download. So you're like a seeder of the file, right?
Yeah, the
I
peer-to-peer network.
Yeah, so eventually it became kind of dangerous, and people were actually getting caught and sued and arrested for pirating music and whatever. So I always had that in the back of my mind, but I was like, I'm just this little kid in El Paso, Texas. Like they're never gonna mess with me. Luckily they didn't, but I mean, I just remember back then it was like there was wars between like sites like the Pirate Bay and uTorrent and like all these places where you can go get this free music, and the federal government just like trying to stop them and suppress them. Like it was crazy.
Yeah, and I know it's a little bit off topic, but like the music thing was sort of a problem. And yeah, obviously with the torrents and being able to have it where if you downloaded it, then you're sharing it back, and if you don't share something, basically your download speed would be nothing. So you're getting basically a benefit to sharing is that you get to download more through sort of that torrent was sort of counterintuitive to what the legal framework was set up for. And that was definitely something that, as the law sort of tried to catch up with, I feel was, yeah, you're like they wanted to go and like sue like some 8-year-old kid who downloaded a bunch of stuff, and it's like I'm sitting here in Canada watching this, going like, that's crazy.
It's
Because
crazy.
they show up to somebody and say, "We're going to charge you $50,000 for like a copyright infringement." Like there's a certain point where I'm pro copyright. Like I think that copyright is an amazing thing because I produce a lot of content and I don't want people to steal it. But there's also a certain aspect of, you look at this going like,
Yeah,
why
of
are
course.
you suing some 8-year-old for $50,000? Like he doesn't have that money. His parents might not have that money. Well, you're gonna make a case out of this, and what ended up happening actually for the music industry is that their consumers basically rebelled against them. They're like, if you're gonna sue us for enjoying your music, then
Yeah. No, yeah, dude. And
and I like it was early 2000s was a dark time for music because they were coming out with some great music, but it was just people were going like, we don't want to buy the stuff that the major labels were producing, and that's where you ended up with all these explosion of indie labels because they're sitting there going like, we're going to come out with music, we're going to release it, they're going to try to monetize it, but they're not going to go after 8-year-old Timmy in El Paso and say, hey, you've been a bad boy.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, so like you were saying, the early 2000s. So in 1998, that's when the first ever MP3 player was invented, right? So
Oh
let's think
yeah.
about that. That was only 20 years ago. And I still have some sort of like either iPod or MP3 player that's dead in one of my drawers somewhere because it just hasn't been used in so long because there's literally no way for you to get MP3 files anymore. But besides the point. So the first MP3 player is invented in 1998, and then they start upgrading them. They start putting better hard drives in them, more memory capacity, because back then an MP3 file could be like 7 gigabytes, and that depending on how big your MP3 player was, that wouldn't hold you that many songs. But just like as the technology started to advance, in 2001 was the first ever iPod. And I don't know if you remember what the first ever iPod looked like, but that thing looked it's an
It looked
artifact
like a
now.
small white brick.
Yes, it was a small white brick with the little wheel that you really didn't know how to use it because it was like not like it was just kind of out there like a wheel to control this thing. And literally you had to import your music into your computer and drop the MP3 files from your CD onto your iPod or MP3 player to use it. So if you really wanted your music on the
Mhm.
go, you had to work for it. That's what I'm saying. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you had to it was not
Yeah,
straightforward.
and you had to, and obviously, if you didn't know what you were doing, you didn't know your way around a computer. It wasn't the most easiest thing to do, so you had to have some technical abilities. But to me, it's just crazy. And then not until 2003 do they release iTunes, the actual application of iTunes, where you can go buy a song for 99 cents. If you go buy a card from the Walgreens with the iTunes card, you know what I mean? So it's just
Yeah, yeah. And the funny thing about that is when they came out with iTunes, that's when Apple started to really clamp down on the iPods, and later on the iPhones was it suddenly became harder to put music on there, and there was just no way you're ever gonna get that music off of there. So it was like, just a one-way street, and yeah, it was like they just pushed that iTunes, buy your music here, listen to it on your iPod, like, welcome to the sort of Apple ecosphere, which again, Apple ecosphere is really good. It's just when you're in it, and it's very difficult to get out of it without having to basically rebuy everything because it's so locked in. Like they even came out with their own audio format eventually that essentially only works on their stuff.
Yeah, you see, and I like how you phrase that. This Apple ecosphere of like, once you're involved in this sort of like this use of our technology and the way it works together and how our devices work together, it's kind of like, do you really want to leave here? Like, do you know how good you have it? Like, 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 don't take us for granted in a way. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I understand. And as I said, like Apple products are great, but like I know there's a bunch of stuff I do. I I can't make an Apple computer do it. I can't make
Yeah,
my iPhone do it. I need a PC. I need a better way to stream something. Like again, they're better these days than they used to be, but there's still a lot of stuff where it's just like it's a pain to sometimes use it. And like I know right now on my iPhone, I have music that I've purchased and it plays on my iPhone and I have it on iTunes on one of my computers, but I have no way of taking that music I've actually paid money for and go and say, well, I want to listen to that on, say, my audio system in my house, unless it has like
Yeah,
Apple Play or whatever it is
yeah,
to be able to do that.
yeah. Unless
So it's sort of a weird thing where it's like, so now I bought a audio interface to play my Apple Music on my speakers,
yeah.
and I'm like, oh, geez.
No, yeah, and like you said, they kind of well, for sure, what Apple does is they set their devices up to be limited in a way, because they restrict things from like anywhere from certain settings to certain apps that are available. They restrict their device. Their device could do the exact same thing that a LG or an Android could do, but it's Apple's security team that they're the ones that are like, nah, we're not going to deal with this. You know what I mean? So it's I don't know. These guys know what they're
Oh
doing. I
yeah,
mean, they got it down to a science. These guys run the world when it comes to mobile devices.
yeah. And then we have things like with radio, it's like there's no reason why my iPhone or your cell phone can't have a radio receiver in there. Like in the old
Right,
days with the Walkman and
right.
stuff, you could like get the radio on there. And now all these smart
Yeah.
devices are out there and they don't have radio. So what ended up happening was the radio industry literally had to make an app. They had to go out and make an app.
Radio
I think it's called iHeartRadio in order to be able to
yeah,
listen to radio on your
on your
mobile
device.
device, and you're listening to that
Yeah,
using the data instead of the free music that's literally passing through you right now as radio waves. And it's sort of a weird thing to have done. And that's where I think for music right now, you're sort of in this weird spot where it's like, yeah, I listen to the radio when I drive on my car because I have a radio in my car. But yeah, when it comes down to like things like you want to listen to music, well, now you're paying for data to have to listen to the music, despite the fact that the music is quote unquote free. You are paying for it through higher data fees. So things like your phone provider, et cetera, they're the ones making the money off the music rather than like the music industry.
yep. Yeah, and to your point on that, like, yeah, why how does it make sense that like your 2000 Honda Accord that's been sitting in your driveway for 3 years can still pick up a radio signal, but your brand new $1,500 iPhone X that has like a badass HD camera in it can't pick up a FM or AM signal that's floating all around you? Like, it doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah. Just the way the technology has evolved. And
And
again,
then
like these days here, you're sitting here going like you can stream everything through the internet. Like you're almost like, why do we even have radio? But radio exists because not everyone is going to pay for mobile data. Like I don't know how the US is, but in Canada, mobile data is still quite expensive.
yeah. No, yeah, and it's a different climate over there where you guys are at when it comes to the accessibility of mobile data. And that's probably why you would see that things like the radio over there is still prevalent. But I still think that anywhere in society, really, there's a place for radio. Just like there's a place for cable and network television. I mean, radio still, is the foundation for a lot of people that grew up knowing that there was only nothing but a radio. So I still think it has its place and it serves its purpose. You know what I mean? I don't think we should just be over here trying to get rid of radio and all these older mediums. I still think we should embrace them a little bit.
Oh yeah, I agree. Like as I said, I'm still shocked that we can sit here with $1,000 mobile smartphone in our technology and we can't get the radio. So if you want the radio, you literally have to go out and buy a like maybe $15 radio in order to be able to hear it, and it might have the cheapest speaker in the world.
Yeah.
But it's just like you're like, but now I can hear the news, I can hear what's going on. Because that's the thing with radio. It's like radio, they'll say, hey guys, there's a giant weather storm coming in. You might want to take cover. Or, hey, you might not want to be on 3rd Street. We don't know what's happening, but there's more police there than we'd prefer.
Yeah, like you're getting real-time traffic updates, real-time weather updates. Like there's still a place in society for that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Especially like in a big city, you do the whole 8 to 5, you leave right at rush hour and there's an accident on one of the major highways in your city, and hey, the radio is going to tell you, "Hey guys, avoid Interstate 5 heading east. You might want to take, a detour around that area." So it still has its purpose, and honestly, like I work at an office. in El Paso, Texas, office setting type of workplace. Every morning, a lot of people have their radios on, and they're all listening to like the local morning show. And you
Yep.
know what I mean? There's still places for that, and it's being utilized obviously because I see it every day happening.
Oh yeah, no, it's I've for the type of work that I've done, I know there's some people that listen to the radio. I But again, it's one of those things of I remember 10 years ago, you couldn't walk into an office without somebody having the radio, and there was sort of like a semblance of you know office seniority as well. The most senior person has the radio, and they
Like,
decide what channel you're going to listen to. I remember going into one place, and it was like they're like, "Well, we hope you like Johnny Cash."
yeah, yeah, that makes sense, man. Because yeah, like you can have it one way, or you can have it a few different ways. You can either be like you're gonna get some sort of country, uh, Johnny Cash style type of music. You're gonna have your guy who listens to nothing but your rock affiliate, whatever station that is. You're
Mhm.
gonna have somebody that listens to today's hits, like all the poppy stuff, and then you might have somebody who listens to like something like if it's Spanish music or hip hop or something else. So like, yeah, whoever was in controlling the radio was controlling the mood and the atmosphere of that workplace for sure. I agree with that.
Yeah, whereas nowadays in the
Oh,
workplace, everyone's got
yeah,
headphones and everyone's got
yep,
their headphones plugged into their computer, and they're all watching it through the internet, and it's like, "Okay,
yep,
cool," or not watching it. They're all listening to it through the internet, and it's like they all have their own, like, accounts and whatever for streaming, and that's good as long as, people are productive and enjoying it, but it's one of those things where it's like, again, I look at it from a cost structure of basically it's free music.
yep,
And
yeah,
then from
so,
musicians, people who are producing new music and stuff, you have it where, how do they make money? Like, especially smaller indie bands, like it's merchandising, maybe a brand deal, or like if they're in a commercial or something like that for local, they might be touring, and then occasionally they'll get like a revenue or sponsorship until sort of they're, discovered, in which case it's like that's how they're making their money. And I know like I'm sure you're absolutely aware of this. We're making $0 on this podcast.
yeah, yes,
We like I'm sitting here in front of like a $4,000 computer, $150 microphone. I'm talking to you. We're doing this as a webcast, just or not as a video chat, just so that we're able to sort of see each other and send signals. But as a podcast, it's audio only. But it's like I look at this going like we're spending like thousands of dollars basically produce a podcast that no one's going to pay for, and everyone's going to
yeah.
enjoy for free, and we're all doing it with smiles on our face.
We're doing it. We're eagerly doing this, and like we're more than willing to be here. So it's kind of like a catch
Absolutely.
22 in a way, you know. But at the same time, if you're gonna get into podcasting, and I've only been podcasting since October, so I'm not a seasoned vet here at podcasting. But one thing that I have noticed is that if you're gonna get into this right away, just for some cash or just to see how many people are gonna listen to you, it's probably not gonna work out that much because I don't know if you've seen what the Apple podcast store looks like, but there's millions of podcasts out there. So,
Oh yeah.
you really have to work on your brand and your identity and developing your podcast to where it's unique to, your brand and your show and you kind of stand out in a way from other podcasts. So,
Yeah.
but like
And,
you said, dude, I mean, obviously we're not going to be making money doing this, but we still have a smile on our face. You know what I mean?
oh, absolutely. And I think that's true for almost anything you're doing creative today. If it's starting a new band, if it's making a movie, if you're doing something creative, you're doing it because you love to do it.
Mhm.
And that's the only reason to do it. Because if you're thinking I'm going to do this and become famous and make millions of dollars, it's just not gonna happen, and for the people that it does happen to, it's like when back in, like, the '80s and stuff, like, or the '90s, when people are like, "I'm gonna, like, finish high school or not finish high school, I'm gonna start a band in my garage, and I'm gonna, like, tour, and we're gonna make so much money." It's like, even back then, the prospect of actually becoming a celebrity and making, you know, enough money to basically, put a roof over your head and food in your mouth for you and your family was slim to none. And you have to realize, like, I've talked to seasoned musicians, and they're like, "Yeah, you when you're touring, you're gone for like 3 months, like, because you just can't go for like a weekend and call it there. You have to, get the band together. Everyone's got to be going. You got to go like every other weekend for some of the local bands, and for some of the larger ones, they're like." they're like, we're going to tour, and it's like Europe or all of North America, or for one group they went to, oh, I can't remember what it's called. Oh, I guess we're going to call it Eastern Europe, but it was sort of Eastern Europe, Middle East, because that's the type of music they played. But it was one of those things where you're just like, yeah, that's what you have to do, and that's where they're making their money. But all their time making music and selling records and stuff, like it's not like it's going to put food on their table. Even if they're selling $10 records, they were able to make for $2. That $8
Yep.
at a local show, you know, isn't a huge influx of cash. So you're doing this because you love it. And if you don't love it, it becomes very obvious because you stop doing it very, very quickly.
Yes, and so and another like just to touch on that real fast, and I won't take too long with this point, but back when I was younger, 19, 20 years old, I wanted to be a rapper, so I started rapping. You know, we I thought we were pretty good. We recorded like I would say upwards of like 20 songs, but then it didn't work out, and like instead of going back and trying to be a rapper again, I shifted my focus to a podcast, and everything that I learned about trying to be a rapper and the do's and do nots, I kind of try to apply them to my podcast now. And I have the oversight to say, hey, well, maybe we shouldn't do things this way. And maybe let's do it this way because of our past experiences. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
So I also think failure and just getting out there and trying things will also help you, and it'll kind of like educate you in ways where you learn more about yourself.
Oh yeah, and I tend to agree. Like you're gonna make mistakes along the road of life, and it's one of those things where if you learn from those mistakes and you make adjustments and you get feedback and you look at what did somebody else do that worked, what did I do that didn't work, and you can continue to improve. One of the biggest things I have when I'm talking to people about being creative, like as I said, I had a couple people asking me about creating YouTube. I said the biggest thing I see people not doing is not doing. They're like, oh, I want to learn how to make the perfect podcast, or I want to make the perfect video. I want to do this, I want to do that, I want to have all this stuff. And it's like, yeah, dude, look at my first video. I was walking around with a GoPro and I was out in the middle of nowhere in High Park in Toronto. And I'm talking to this thing saying how great it is for a GoPro, for a vlogging camera, and it is the most jittery thing you have ever watched because I could not talk in a straight sentence without and oh, and it was crazy. But it's like, yeah, you have to actually go out and do it. By like the third episode, I was better, and now 4 months in, I'm like, okay, now I'm still not great, but I'm able to be more natural on the camera and during the podcast. Something, okay, I can now talk and do it, but like you can't learn that by not doing it. And I feel like there's
Yeah.
a lot of people, like especially like you know me, like I'm talking to you the other day and I was like, yeah, I want to make a podcast, and you're like, when? I'm like, now. I don't care if the first 4 episodes are garbage. Like I'd prefer they're not garbage, but there's a certain point where I'm like, if
Yeah.
I don't make those 4 episodes, I'm not going to get any better. Episode 5 is going to be amazing. By the way, you want to subscribe to this podcast because you want to see episode 5. I guarantee you, it's going to be amazing. Please note this guarantee has no monetary value.
Just a disclaimer on that
Just a
one.
quick disclaimer on
Gotta
that
throw
one.
that in there. Quick disclaimer, guys. Not trying to catch a lawsuit here. Yeah, just bouncing off what you said, man. When we were talking about, so a little background to how we even like got into contact with each other. We literally just met like 48 hours ago. I joined this podcast group on Facebook. I don't know if you were already a part of it or you had recently joined.
Oh, I joined, yes. Yeah, about 48 hours ago.
Okay, yeah. So these podcast groups are great, and I really like them. And like, I recently stumbled upon them no more than 2 to 3 weeks ago. So you're actually only the second person that I've actually sat down and created content with from the podcast group. So that's cool. But one thing that I did notice is, you'll go on there, you'll say, "Hey, I'm willing to work with people. Like, let's create something. Let's get together. Send me your ideas. Let's bounce off each other." And a lot of people, they get in there, but then they don't like, it's almost like they don't bring anything to the plate. Like when you're in there and you're trying to create new content with people you don't know, you have to come up into the conversation and be like, look, this is what I do. This is what I like to talk about. What do you do? And then what can we make from it? And how can we combine it and create something? And if, I think the connection needs to be there, and you have to be open to communication, which is sometimes a problem with some of the people in the group, but not always the case.
Yeah, no, I It's the same thing I find when I'm doing like video work as well. There's a lot of people who are like, I have a screenplay. And you're like, great. And they're like, well, I want somebody to produce it. And you're like, great. And
Great.
you're like, do you have any money for this? And they're like, no. I'm like, okay, well, what are you going to bring to the table? I have a screenplay. And you're like, and nothing against script writers. Like I have a bunch of friends that write scripts, and I write scripts myself. But there's a certain point where it's like you got to bring a little bit more to the table than, well, I have this great screenplay that may be first or second draft, and you're like, oh my god. And the same thing with this podcast group. It's like, yeah, I have no problem talking on a variety of subject, and we have to find somebody who can match with what I'm looking for and what they're looking for. But yeah, there's a lot of people on there that are like, they'll post something saying, I'm looking for this, and you'll get 20, 30, 40 replies. I'm looking at all the replies being like, I'd love to be on your podcast. Here's my podcast.
Yeah.
I'm not going to watch your podcast, man, to find out if you're suitable for my channel. I don't have enough time in the day to start watching 40 different podcasts in
Yeah,
hopes
like
to say, hey, are you guys willing to come onto my podcast and talk about technology? Like,
yeah. No, yeah, exactly. Like that's kind of like when I see those posts, it's almost like there shouldn't be any podcast links in those posts. What it should be is just some dialect between you and that other person. Like, hey, what are you into? Like, how do you do your
yeah,
podcast? This is how I do mine, and like, you know what I mean. So, but it's cool because like literally, like we started messaging and we were just talking, and then we were just talking about not even like right away of the podcast. We were just talking about our situations, like you and your YouTube channel, me and just barely starting my podcast and whatever the case was. But then right away we're like, hey, dude, here's some topics. You pick some that you want, and then I even will throw you another topic based off one of the topics you give me. And then let's set a time. Let's not make it 2 weeks from now. Can you do it tomorrow? If not tomorrow, can you do it on Monday? Like, let's get this in like, let's get the wheels moving here, you know?
yeah, let's get it in the can. Let's, get this done, get it out there, and then we can move on to whatever's next. If that's more collaboration or we go our separate ways, we're not sitting there going like, okay, I have to remember I have a podcast meeting with Chris on July 34th and be like, that's never going to
Yeah.
happen. Probably because it's the 34th and I just randomly threw out a number that doesn't exist.
Yeah, we got an episode scheduled next year sometime. We're still working on it. We're doing the rundown. We're still trying to figure out what we're talking about.
Yeah, February 22nd is going to be amazing. You guys got to just show up for that.
Yeah, man. Like I said, I really appreciate you for having me on here. Like, shout out to those podcasts. Like, I'm not trying to hate on all of them because, like I said, I've already met some really cool people. You being one of them. But yeah, dude. Like, shout out to you again for having me on here. Really do appreciate that.
I'm almost certain I appreciate you being a guest on my podcast 100 times more than you being the guest on the podcast. It's like I'm like, oh my god, I found somebody who's willing to talk to me.
Yeah, dude. And honestly, like, I'm really open to like to working and doing more collaborations. Kind of like how we were talking about. Like, to me, what like matters to me the most is that we're prepared and like that we discuss the topics beforehand. Because I'm not that kind of guy that's just like, all right, fire up the mics, let's go, 30 minutes on random banter. You know what I mean? We could do that, but I think we could do better by us. Like, you know what I mean?
Well, you saw the I guess it was the presentation slides I sent
Yeah.
you. It's just sort of like, here's a bunch of stuff that we could potentially talk about, just so that we're not sitting here going, yeah, I like the color orange. What about
Yeah.
you?
So what'd you do today, bro? Where'd you get that BD? Nice headset. I play Call of Duty Warzone. What do
Uh,
you do?
uh, Personally, for me today, and I'm going back to it in 5 minutes after finishing this discussion, I'm just cutting down a whole bunch of shrubbery.
He's all that's it. He's like, got a whole bunch of work to do.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's one of those fun things where it's just
So real fast, dude, ask you can I ask you a little bit more about like where you're at in Canada?
so I'm actually out in the country. The closest major city is Kingston. And basically, yeah, I'm just out here in the country, isolating from the world that seems to be going crazier every day,
Okay.
producing YouTube
Yeah.
videos and podcasts and some other creative content. Because before that, I would do like commercials, uh, narrative work, etc., for film and TV. And then before that, I was at university. But I'm just like, I'm sitting here going like, yeah, I'm not doing any of that right now. None of that's happening. Nobody's got the budget for it. So how can I be productive? And I'm like, well, I've been working on
Yep.
sort of this YouTube thing, and I want to get that going. So I decided to do it. And then somebody said, well, if you're doing this YouTube thing, you should might as well do podcasts, because sometimes your YouTube videos, you can basically just strip the audio off of them and put them as a podcast if there's not a lot of visual stuff in there. And you're like, okay, cool. And the next thing you know, I'm sitting here going like, okay, I now have a YouTube channel. I got a podcast. I have guests. I have some live streaming capabilities that I'm coming up with next week. And yeah, I'm just producing a bunch of crazy stuff up here in Canada.
It's crazy, man. Because like when we were first talking, you told me from Canada. I was like, wow, I literally just met somebody from like a whole different country. Like it's amazing how fast like that we have the ability to really like work with each other. And like I love it, dude. I love technology now. It's
Yeah.
crazy.
Oh yeah. No, the reach in technology is insane. And as I said, like I will happily interview people or be on other people's podcasts, pretty much around the world, because as long as my internet is done, by about 6 p.m. my time, I'm good to go. After that, it tends to fall apart, and I'm phoning tomorrow to complain
That's
again
it.
for the fourth time, being like, "Hey guys, why is my internet not working after 6 p.m.?"
That's crazy. So is it just because like a lot of people are on the internet at that
Yeah,
time, or do
yeah.
they just
Being
have
out in the
technical issues?
country, the internet in the evening is hard because everyone's like on Netflix, and everyone's Netflix.
Everybody already did their day work, so they're home relaxing, had some
Yeah,
dinner, want to watch a TV show.
Netflix and probably Fortnite for the kids, and what's it now? Warzone, is that the new one?
Warzone's the new
Yeah,
video
yeah.
game that's out
I need
there.
I need to download it, but 101 gigs is going to take a while.
Dude, it took me a whole day to download the latest update. I'm not kidding, dude. The whole day, like
Yeah,
the whole day. So just be prepared for that. Just a heads up,
yeah. Be
FYI.
like, hey, the internet's not going to work for the next 3 days. Clink, install. Which is a
Dude,
downside to the whole, the way that we get content now. It's like physical medium is almost completely gone. Like, what did they do? They came out with the PlayStation 5, and they came with like two versions, one where you could put the disc in and one where you don't have a disc.
yeah, I was actually surprised about that. They have a discless version of the
Yeah.
console, and to me, I was like, "Oh, that's it. There goes video games. We lost those two now. That's all
Yeah.
digital now."
Well, essentially a PlayStation 5, I hate to say it, is just a custom computer at this point. Like there's stuff that's in there that, I'm sure is going to be geared and optimized for video games. But at the end of the day, like what does the PlayStation 5 have that a PC doesn't? And for the record, I'm a PC player.
Okay. Yeah. So essentially, you're saying they just built into the PlayStation a PC style like operating system, if you will, for the whole console, and essentially it's like another computer,
Well,
right? That's
yes,
what you're
well,
saying.
because when you look at it, and the same thing with like Xbox and the PlayStation 4, was people are looking at it going like, yeah, okay, so you got your RAM in there, you got your hard drive, you got your motherboard, you got some type of CPU, and then you have like a giant graphics processing unit, and it's like, yeah, that's essentially the same thing as a computer. It's just it's optimized to play specific games, and it's designed so that you can have like faster frame rates, et cetera, than say the equivalent gear if it was built out of a PC. But then you're like, but I could just buy a PC and play the same games. Like
At
like
all,
like
yeah.
I remember when PCs were expensive. Now it's like I'm like, oh, I got my graphics card here that cost me $1,000 when I bought it. It's still working great. It still does 4K video. But at some point I'm going to upgrade to like the new what's it, RTX technology from Nvidia or something like that. But I'm looking at this going like, yeah, that's like what, $700, you know? And I can use it on my computer for so many different things, whereas I could also go out and buy whatever 700, 800, $900, whatever the new PlayStation 5 happens to come out being. I'm like, oh, I can use it to play video games, and that's it.
Yeah. And that's it. Yeah, you're limited in
Yeah.
that way. Yeah, I mean, I hope they don't come out to be 500 or $800 when they come out. I would say like 4 or 5, because that's a little steep for a new console.
Yeah, well, I haven't bought a console in probably 10 years.
Okay. Well, these guys, they have a good people will pay for a console, so I'm sure they're gonna make their
Oh, I'm
money's
I'm
worth.
I'm
That's for
I'm
sure.
sure they'll make their monies. I'm always sure they're gonna make their money. At the end of the day,
No problem
these
doing.
people, when they get to like the fifth revision, they're gonna make their money off of it. They got it down to a science.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's where they start. They're like, okay, first, how much money are we gonna make off of this? Okay, then we can talk
Yeah,
specs.
yeah. So I'd like to thank you for coming on today, Chris, because we're getting a little bit over time. I have no idea where the clock's gone now. Great. So we're getting a little bit over time. So thanks for coming here. So if people want to connect with you and your podcast, what is the podcast name, and what's the best way to connect with you?
Okay, guys. So my name is Christopher Marquez. I host a podcast called Conversing with Chris and Misa, the podcast. Misa, my co-host, and my producer are the predominant figures on my podcast. And essentially, it's a podcast similar to Joe Rogan style, sit down, interview somebody, casual banter, but also with like a comedic flair, and also open to like political discussions, anything like that. If you guys if you guys want to check out what we're doing, you can follow us on Facebook, Conversing with Chris and Misa, the podcast. Also, on Instagram, the same handle. YouTube, same handle. And we're also now on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So you can check us out on any of those mediums. Thank you again for having me on your podcast, man. I really do appreciate it. I had a great time talking about technology and all the stuff that we've gone through growing up. So, yeah, guys, if you guys want to hear more of myself, check us out, Conversing with Chris and Misa, the podcast.
And thank you for coming on today, Chris. And for viewers, thank you for watching the podcast, and especially watching all the way through the podcast. That's definitely always a positive thing. And just want to remind you that we are all in a sphere hurtling through space, and aliens haven't been proven real yet.
Thanks again, man. Anytime you need something, let me know. You know where to find me.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you very much.
All right. See ya.